You think you know Chuck Norris? Think again. Last month, on Flight QF1127, an arrogant businessman made the mistake of insulting the legendary martial artist himself. And what happened on that flight will show you a side of him that few have seen. But before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It happened at Sydney International Airport, December 2024. Chuck Norris walked through the first-class cabin of the Los Angeles-bound flight, his worn boots and leather vest drawing curious glances. His famous face was partially hidden under his signature cowboy hat as he quietly settled into seat number 6. That's when the shouting started. "Hey, poor man, this is my seat. Get the hell out." Derek Langston stood in the aisle, his tailored navy suit matching the vein pulsing in his forehead. Fresh from a failed business meeting that had cost him millions, he was already on edge. Now, staring at Chuck Norris, though he didn't recognize him yet, his frustration had found its target. Chuck looked up with his characteristic calm smile. "Afternoon, partner. Mind if we check those tickets?" Derek's face flushed red. "Check the tickets? Look at your clothes. You clearly wandered in from economy. First class isn't for people like you." Chuck reached for Derek's ticket, and that's when everything changed. The small piece of paper in his hand would expose far more than just a simple seat number. Chuck turned the ticket right side up with the gentle motion that made several passengers hide their smiles. Derek's seat was number 9, not number 6. "I don't care what the ticket says," Derek spat. "Someone like you can't afford first class." "What? Did you sell your ranch to buy this ticket?" The flight attendant stepped forward. "Sir, your seat is. Do you know who I am?" Derek cut her off. "I'm Derek Langston, CEO of Langston Enterprises." His voice cracked slightly at his company's name. The morning's financial news had been brutal. A $50 million deal collapsed in his face just hours ago. And now this cowboy was challenging him. Chuck adjusted his hat slightly. "Sometimes life has a way of teaching us humility, Mr. Langston." "Humility?" Derek's laugh was harsh. "I built my empire from nothing, and I won't be lectured about success by some cowboy who probably counts his money in quarters." Chuck's eyes met Derek's. "You might want to count again, partner." And with those words, something shifted in the first-class cabin of Flight QF-127. "Try thousands per roundhouse kick," Chuck said quietly, his Texas drawl carrying through the cabin. Derek's face contorted with rage. "Listen here, you worthless piece of—" He caught himself as a mother covered her child's ears. First class is for real successful people, not some wannabe cowboy who thinks dressing like it's rodeo day makes him special. Chuck stood slowly. Even in his casual stance, there was something powerful in his presence that made two flight attendants exchange knowing looks. His movements carried the fluid grace of a martial arts master, though Derek was too angry to notice. "Success isn't measured by the suit you wear, partner," Chuck said, his voice calm but firm. "Sometimes it's measured by how you treat others when no one's watching." Derek's laugh echoed through the cabin. "Oh, spare me the cowboy wisdom. What would you know about success? Your boots probably cost less than my watch strap." A young boy tugged his mother's sleeve, his eyes wide with recognition. She quickly pulled out her phone, typing frantically as realization dawned on her face. "You might want to check your social media, friend," Chuck said, settling back into his seat. "Seems like today's business news about Langston Enterprises is making quite a stir." Derek's face went pale. The failed Sydney deal. How did the stranger know his company's stock was in freefall? His biggest client had walked away just hours ago, and now this cowboy was bringing it up. Who are you?" Derek's voice wavered. Chuck just smiled, that same knowing smile that had intimidated countless opponents in the ring. "Just someone who learned that real power isn't about putting others down." That's when the whispers started. A teenage girl in row 4 gasped, showing her phone to her parents. The wave of recognition spread through the cabin like wildfire, and Derek was about to learn exactly who he'd been insulting. Derek raised his voice again, determined to maintain control. "Security. Can someone call security? This man refuses to move to his proper seat in economy." The head flight attendant approached, trying to hide her smile. "Sir, I checked the manifest. Mr. Norris is indeed assigned to seat 6A. Prime." "Mr. Norris?" Derek's voice cracked. A silver-haired man across the aisle leaned forward. "Son, you've been yelling at Chuck Norris for the past 10 minutes. The color drained from Derek's face as the reality sank in. The worn boots, the confident stance, the martial arts reference. It all suddenly made terrible sense. "That's impossible," Derek stammered. "Chuck Norris wouldn't be dressed like..." "Like what, partner?" Chuck's eyes twinkled. "Like someone who values comfort over appearance. Like someone who doesn't need a fancy suit to know his worth." The other passengers weren't even trying to hide their amusement now. Phones were out, recording Derek's moment of revelation. His social media nightmare was about to get much worse. "Mr. Norris, I didn't." Derek's designer tie suddenly felt like a noose. "Seat 9A is right back there," Chuck said, pointing. "Unless you'd prefer economy." A ripple of laughter went through the cabin. But Chuck wasn't done teaching his lesson. As Derek turned to slink away, Chuck's next words stopped him cold. "You know what the difference is between strength and power?" Derek turned back, his face a mix of shame and curiosity. "Real strength," Chuck continued, his voice carrying effortlessly through the now silent cabin, "isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting them up, even when they've tried to tear you down." Derek stood frozen in the aisle, his earlier arrogance crumbling. The man he'd called poor and mocked for his clothes was not just a celebrity. He was a legend, known worldwide for both his fighting skills and his character. "I've spent my life teaching others how to defend themselves," Chuck said, standing again. "But the most important battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought within ourselves, against our own pride and prejudice." A flight attendant approached with Derek's carry-on. "Sir, your seat is ready." But Derek didn't move. His mind was racing through every insult he'd hurled, every condescending remark. I'm finished," he muttered. "First the deal, now this. Tomorrow, everyone will." "No," Chuck's voice was gentle now. "You had a bad day, that you made a mistake, or that you learned from it." Derek looked up, surprised by the lack of judgment in Chuck's tone. "The world's quick to condemn, slow to forgive," Chuck continued. "But true redemption starts with admitting our mistakes." An elderly passenger spoke up from her seat. "I remember when you started in films, Mr. Norris. You were always humble, even at the height of your fame." Chuck nodded. "Because every day, someone reminded me where I came from, and I never wanted to forget." Derek's legs felt weak. The man he judged for looking poor had more wealth, both material and spiritual, than he could imagine. And instead of humiliating him in return, Chuck Norris was offering him something far more valuable than a first-class seat. "Take a seat, partner." Chuck gestured to the empty spot beside him. "Let me tell you about my first Hollywood audition." Derek hesitated and slowly sat down. The other passengers watched in amazement as Chuck Norris, martial arts champion, movie star, and cultural icon, began sharing his story. "I showed up in boots just like these," Chuck smiled, tapping his worn footwear. "The producer took one look and said I belonged in the stables, not on camera." "Know what I did?" Derek shook his head, still struggling to process the situation. "I thanked him for his time," Chuck continued, "then went home, trained harder, and came back. Back the next month, still wearing my boots." A young boy, 2 rows back, was recording everything on his phone. But for once, Derek didn't care about social media. His own words echoed in his mind. "First class isn't for people like you." "Did you get the part?" Derek asked quietly. "Eventually," Chuck nodded. "But that's not the point. See, that producer taught me something valuable. Just like you're learning something today." The entire cabin was silent now, hanging on every word. Chuck Norris wasn't just telling a story. He was offering Derek a chance at redemption. But first, he had to understand the lesson that was about to change everything. "Money can buy a first-class ticket," Chuck said, "but it can't buy class itself. That comes from how you treat others, especially when you think nobody's watching." Derek stared at his Italian leather shoes. I lost a $50 million deal today, he confessed. Everything I built, it's falling apart. Sometimes we need to fall, Chuck replied, to remember how to stand properly. The cabin crew began their pre-flight preparations, but no one was paying attention to the safety demonstration. All eyes were on the unlikely pair in row 6, the humble legend and the humbled executive. You know what's ironic? Chuck continued. When I started out, I couldn't afford economy, let alone first class. But even back then, I knew something many wealthy folks never learn. What's that? Derek asked. That the size of your wallet matters less than the size of your heart. A teenager across the aisle wiped away a tear. Her mother, who had been recording the entire exchange, finally lowered her phone. But you made it, Derek said quietly. You became successful. Chuck's response would haunt Derek for years to come. Success isn't what you're thinking it is, partner. And you're about to find that out. Chuck reached into his worn leather vest and pulled out a newspaper clipping. Your failed deal made the morning news. But did you read the whole story? Derek shook his head. The company you tried to buy, Chuck continued. It's owned by a man who started with nothing, built it from the ground up, treating every employee like family. He rejected your offer, not because of money, but because your reputation preceded you. Derek's hands began to shake. My reputation? For putting profit over people? For judging books by their covers? Chuck's eyes met Derek's. Just like you judged me by my boots. A flight attendant approached with a torn piece of paper. Mr. Norris, I hate to interrupt, but my nephew, he's battling cancer, and, before she could finish, Chuck was already signing an autograph, adding a personal message of encouragement. See that? Chuck turned to Derek. That signature is worth more than these boots. But the prayer I'll say for her nephew tonight, that's priceless. Derek watched as Chuck treated the flight attendant with the same respect he'd show a CEO, the same respect Derek had failed to show anyone that day. The deal, Chuck continued, wasn't just about money. It was about character. And partner, today's your chance to show yours. The plane had reached cruising altitude when Derek finally spoke again. How do you come back from something like this? Everyone on this flight has seen me at my worst. That's exactly where redemption begins, Chuck replied. When we hit rock bottom, we find out what we're really made of. He gestured toward the other passengers. These folks don't want to see you fall, partner. They want to see you rise. That's the American way, giving people a second chance when they're truly sorry. Derek straightened in his seat. Mr. Norris, Chuck, he corrected gently. Chuck. Derek's voice cracked. I judged you without knowing a thing about you. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And now that you know who I am. That's just it, Derek replied, realization dawning. Shouldn't matter who you are. I shouldn't treat anyone that way. Chuck smiled. Now that's what I call a kick to the ego. The tension in the cabin finally broke as laughter rippled through the air. Even Derek managed a genuine smile. The world's going to see this video, he sighed. Good, Chuck replied. Let them see your redemption, too. 3 months after that flight, Derek Langston made headlines again. Not for a business deal, but for transforming his company's culture. Every new employee now receives a pair of worn boots on their first day, with a note that reads, Your character matters more than your clothes. The viral video of his encounter with Chuck Norris didn't destroy him, as he'd feared. Instead, it became a symbol of transformation. A man who learned that true class isn't about net worth but self-worth. As for Chuck, he sent Derek a signed photo a week later. Not of his famous roundhouse kick or movie poses, but of those scuffed boots. The message read, Keep walking the right path, partner. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come wrapped in unexpected packages. For Derek, it came in the form of a cowboy-dressed legend who taught him that humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of real strength. You know, folks, it's easy to judge others by their appearance, their clothes, or their bank accounts. But as Chuck Norris showed us that day, true class isn't about where you sit on the plane. It's about how you treat the person sitting next to you. And DK? Well, he finally learned what real success looks like. It's not about the suit you wear or the seat you occupy. It's about the lives you touch and the hearts you change. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and want to hear more like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Chuck's wisdom. This is Ludwig, reminding you that sometimes the best life lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. See you in the next video.